On Tuesday night, December the 18th, we had the most recent session of Bible study for everybody. It started out with a very brief review, stating that the preceding week we had looked at Mark 4:1 through 4:34, which were the parables, a bunch of parables that Jesus used to teach with. We didn't go into any detail because we had to get into the preview of coming attractions, which was the world-famous Christmas quiz. The world-famous Christmas quiz will be divided into two parts, and this is part one. The ground rules were I had people get into teams. That didn't work out quite so well, but nonetheless, they were in teams, and we rotated answering amongst the teams so that everyone had a chance to win a prize. So let's get on with the world-famous Christmas quiz. Question number 1. In the Christmas carol, Good King Wenceslaus, who was King Wenceslaus? Well, it turns out he grew up in Bohemia and England in the 10th century. He was a Catholic. He became martyred after he was assassinated by his brother. His saint's day is the 28th of September. He's the patron saint to the Czech Republic and was really only a duke. He was, however, very pious and very generous. The song itself was written in 1853. In the same song, who, what, and when was the feast of Stephen? Good King Wenceslaus looked down on the feast of Stephen. Well, Stephen was the first Christian martyr. We read about him in Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 6, verse 5 to chapter 7, verse 59. His saint's day is the 26th of December in the Roman Catholic faith, and in the Orthodox faith, it's the 27th of December. And he was the first Christian martyr, as I said. What does Advent mean? How many candles originally were in an Advent wreath, and how many are there currently? Advent literally means the arrival of a notable person, a thing, or an event. When we would say in a discussion, well, with the advent of television, people's minds turned to chewing gum, the arrival of television. Originally, there were 4 candles in Advent, one for each of the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. Currently, typically, most churches now have 5 candles in the Advent wreath, and they light the 5th candle on Christmas Day. Who was Santa Claus? Holy Claus was Nicholas, Saint Nicholas, the Bishop of Myra, which, as you well know, is in the ancient town of Lycia, which, as you well know, is in Turkey. He attended the Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D. Legend says that he would give gifts to the poor and the weak, leaving them behind as he slept. In the Middle Ages, he became the patron saint of charitable fraternities, children, and the patron saint of Moscow. He pretty much disappeared after the Reformation, except in Holland. And Holland clung to St. Nicholas, and he was brought to the United States by the Dutch Reformed Christians. Why does Santa wear red? Well, red was the bishop's color, and Santa Claus was the Bishop of Myra, as I said. When did Americans first get their detailed description of Santa, and what is the origin of the current version? Well, Americans got their first description of Santa when Washington Irving included a drawing of him in the 1809 publication of A History of New York. When Clement Clark Moore wrote "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," It was Moore's account that characterized Santa as a jolly old man who rides in a sleigh pulled by flying reindeer and slides down chimneys to deliver gifts. The modern version, as we know, think Santa looks now in the United States, comes from Thomas Nast engravings, which appeared in Harper's Weekly in 1863, between 1863 and 1886. What was the origin of the word Christmas? Christ's Mass. When and how was December 25th selected as Christmas Day? Well, around 336 AD to 440 AD, the church began to set the 25th of December as Christmas. And they set it, by the way, to offset the pagan celebration of the winter solstice, or Saturnalia, which was a time of merrymaking and exchanging gifts. Now, that's not so unusual if you'll reflect that nowadays many churches have begun having harvest parties to offset the increasingly occult Halloween. Actually, when did Christ's birth probably occur, and what's the basis for that answer? Well, it had to be probably around mid-autumn, because then, as now, no shepherds in Israel are watching their flocks by night out in the open in December, which is a cold, rainy season over there. Furthermore, no competent Roman administrator would require registration involving travel during the season when back then Judea was generally impassable because of the rainy season. Lastly, Jesus was born about 6 months after John the Baptist, which occurred in the spring. When was The Night Before Christmas published? 1823. Who is reputed to be the first person to put candles, i.e. lights, on a Christmas tree? Well, that was Martin Luther. Now, I don't know if he was the first person to burn down a Christmas tree or who that was, but Martin Luther was the first person to put candles on a Christmas tree. What is the only celebration or feast that is ordained in the New Testament? The Lord's Supper, or Holy Communion. When were the 12 days of Christmas? They were the 12 days between the 25th of December and the 6th of January. And the 6th of January is Epiphany, called Epiphany, and it is the date of the arrival of the magi. We'll get back to the magi. How many magi does the Bible say there were? Well, it doesn't say. There are 3 gifts that were brought: gold and frankincense and myrrh, which we'll talk about more in a minute here. And so the assumption was made that there were 3 magi. What was the significance of those gifts that I mentioned? Well, gold signifies king royalty, or Christ's kingship. Frankincense, which was used as incense, speaks of his priestly duties. And myrrh, which back then was an embalming fluid, speaks of his death. In the millennium, which gift will not be there and why? There will be no myrrh, because Christ is never going to die again. He lives eternally. What does the Bible say Mary rode on going into Bethlehem? Well, quite frankly, it doesn't say. Who talked to the innkeeper? Well, it doesn't say anything about an innkeeper being talked to at all. From what Bible verse comes this line? Away in a manger, the baby awakes, but little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. Well, there isn't a Bible verse that says that. Is a virgin birth really possible? This was a trick question. Of course, God can do anything, and God did have a virgin birth when Christ was born in Bethlehem, lo, those many years ago. In actuality, now, since 1978, Any virgin can have a baby with the advent of in vitro fertilization. Any woman can have a baby. Who were the Magi and where did they come from? Magi is the plural form of magoi, a Greek word for a sect of priests of the Medes. Those are the modern-day Kurds. Darius the Great put them over the state religion of Persia. By the 3rd century, by the way, they were called kings. By the 6th century, they all had names. And by the 14th century, they were kings with names from certain regions. It's sort of like fish stories. They get better and better with the passage of time. Daniel, from the Old Testament, when in Babylon during the exile, had a title of Rab-Maj, which meant the chief of the Magi. And these guys were really kingmakers, politicians. They selected the succeeding kings in Persia. When did the Magi come, and did they come to the manger? Well, they came probably 2 years after the birth of Christ. And in Matthew 2, verse 11, we read, when they came into the house, they gave him the gifts. So they did not come to the manger. What is the origin of Rudolph's the red-nosed reindeer? Well, Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer came about like this. In 1939, a Montgomery Ward's advertising executive distributed 2.4 million copies of a booklet entitled Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. In 1949, Gene Autry recorded it as a song, and the rest, as they say, is history. That brings us to the end of part 1 of the world-famous Christmas quiz. The schedule for Bible study for everybody will be no session on the December 25th or January the 1st, and we will start back up again on January the 8th. This concludes part 1 of the world-famous Christmas quiz.